Story 1. The Mirror Highway. Marcus Whitfield had been driving cross-country routes for 18 years, hauling everything from electronics to refrigerated goods across 48 states. He'd seen sunrises over the Rockies, navigated blizzards through Montana, and white-knuckled his way through deserts. At 42 years old, he thought he'd experienced every challenge the open road could throw at him. That confidence shattered on a September night along Interstate 80 in western Nebraska. The load was standard, automotive parts destined for a warehouse in Sacramento. Marcus left Omaha at 6 in the evening, planning to drive through the night and reach Cheyenne by dawn. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and his CB radio played the usual chatter of other drivers checking conditions and sharing coffee recommendations at upcoming truck stops. Around 11, he noticed something peculiar in his passenger side mirror. Another semi-truck appeared to be following at the exact same distance, maintaining perfect synchronization with his speed. When Marcus accelerated to 70, the truck behind matched him instantly. When he slowed to 65, so did his shadow. The headlights never varied in intensity or position. At first, Marcus assumed it was just coincidence, another driver with a similar schedule and cruise control set to the same speed. But after 20 minutes of this perfect synchronization, an uncomfortable feeling settled in his chest. He picked up his CB radio and switched to channel 19. "This is Black Thunder eastbound on 80, mile marker 247. Got a driver behind me in what looks like a Peterbilt." "You copying me, driver?" Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting the squelch, but received no response. The headlights in his mirror remained constant, unwavering, almost mechanical in their precision. Marcus decided to test his follower. He activated his turn signal and began merging into the right lane, planning to let the mysterious truck pass. As he changed lanes, the truck behind him did the same, not to pass but to follow. It maintained the exact same distance, now in the right lane directly behind him. His jaw tight. Marcus switched lanes again, moving back to the left. The truck followed seamlessly, as if connected by an invisible tether. The synchronization was so perfect it seemed impossible for a human driver to achieve. He pressed the accelerator harder, pushing his rig up to 75 miles per hour. The headlights behind him stayed locked in position. He could now make out more detail in the mirror. The truck was definitely a Peterbilt, dark-colored, possibly black or navy blue, but something was wrong with it. The proportions seemed slightly off, stretched in ways that made his eyes hurt when he tried to focus on specific details. Marcus reached for his cell phone, thinking he might call the highway patrol. No signal. In this area, that wasn't entirely unusual, but the timing felt ominous. He glanced at his GPS. The screen showed his truck as a blue dot on the gray line of Interstate 80, but there was no second dot behind him. According to the GPS, he was the only vehicle on this stretch of highway. The CB radio suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, Marcus heard his own voice. "This is Black Thunder eastbound on 80, mile marker 247. His blood went cold. He hadn't transmitted anything in the last 10 minutes. "What the hell?" he whispered. The radio crackled again, and this time he heard himself completing the earlier transmission. "Got a driver behind me in what looks like a Peterbilt." "You copying me, driver?" Marcus grabbed the CB handset, his hand shaking. "Who is this? This isn't funny." The response came in his own voice, but with a strange, hollow quality, as if echoing from a great distance. "Who is this? This isn't funny." He threw the handset down and focused on the road ahead, his heart hammering against his ribs. The highway stretched endlessly before him, perfectly straight, the dotted white lines disappearing into darkness. He'd driven this route dozens of times. He knew there should be a slight curve coming up in about 3 miles, followed by an exit for a small town called Lodgepole. But the road remained straight. 5 miles passed according to his odometer, then 6, then 7. The curve never appeared, the exit never came. Marcus checked his mirrors again. The truck was still there, maintaining its impossible precision. But now he could see something else. In his driver's side mirror, there was another truck. An exact duplicate of the one behind him, following at the same distance on the opposite side. "No, no, no," he muttered, checking his passenger mirror again. Both trucks were still visible, one in each mirror, perfectly synchronized. He looked out his actual windows, craning his neck to see behind him directly rather than through the mirrors. The highway behind him was empty, completely empty. No headlights, no trucks, nothing but darkness and pavement. But in the mirrors, the trucks remained. Marcus's breath came in short gasps. He considered pulling over, but the idea of stopping while those phantom trucks were following him seemed like the worst possible. He pressed the accelerator down further, pushing his rig to 80 miles per hour, then 85. The engine roared, and the trailer swayed slightly with the speed, but the trucks in his mirrors stayed locked in position as if speed meant nothing to them. The odometer showed he traveled 15 miles since he first noticed the curve should have appeared. The GPS still showed him on Interstate 80, but the mile markers had stopped updating. According to the screen, he'd been at mile marker 247 for the past 20 minutes. Then he saw something ahead that made his stomach drop, his own tail lights. In the distance, growing closer, was the back of a semi-truck that looked exactly like his own rig. Same trailer, same running lights, same license plate when he got close enough to read it. He was catching up to himself. Marcus slammed on the brakes, the air brakes hissing and squealing as 50,000 pounds of truck and cargo fought against momentum. The rig shuddered and slowed, and for a moment he thought he might jackknife. But he brought it under control, finally stopping completely in the right lane of the highway. The truck ahead, his truck kept driving, disappearing into the darkness. The two trucks in his mirrors had also stopped, maintaining their relative positions. Through the mirrors, he could see they were exact replicas of his own rig, down to the company logo on the trailer doors. He sat in the stopped truck, engine idling, for several minutes. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The highway was utterly silent except for the rumble of his own engine. No other traffic appeared in either direction. Marcus made a decision. He put the transmission in reverse and began backing up. If he couldn't go forward, maybe he could escape by going backward. The truck crept slowly in reverse, the backup alarm beeping its warning into the empty night. In the mirrors, the phantom trucks also began reversing, maintaining their synchronized positions. Marcus accelerated the reverse, moving faster now, the white lines of the highway disappearing beneath his trailer. He reversed for what felt like miles, the speedometer showing negative numbers as he pushed the limits of how fast he could safely back up. Then, without warning, his truck jolted forward. He hadn't changed gears, hadn't touched the controls, but suddenly he was moving forward again at highway speed. The mirrors showed him still reversing, but through his windshield, he was clearly driving forward. The disconnect between what he saw and what he felt made him nauseous. He closed his eyes, counted to 10, and opened them again. He was moving forward. The mirrors showed backward. Both seemed equally real. A sign appeared ahead, Lodgepole, exit 48, 2 miles. Marcus nearly sobbed with relief. He didn't know how or why, but the nightmare seemed to be ending. The exit appeared exactly where it should be, and he took it, slowing down as his rig curved off the interstate onto the exit ramp. The moment his trailer cleared the highway, the trucks in his mirrors vanished. His CB radio crackled back to normal chatter, and his cell phone signal returned with a cascade of delayed text notifications. His GPS updated, showing him at exit 48, exactly where he should be. Marcus pulled into the first truck stop he found, parked, and sat trembling in his cab for 20 minutes. When he finally checked his logbook, he discovered something that made his blood run cold all over again. According to every clock in his truck, the dashboard, his phone, his watch, he'd lost 2 hours. It was now 1:30 in the morning. but he had clear memories of every minute of the last 2 hours, the endless straight highway, the mirror trucks, all of it. He asked other drivers at the truck stop if they'd been on Interstate 80 westbound that night, if they'd seen anything unusual. None of them had. Most said the highway had been quiet, normal, boring as usual. Marcus completed his delivery to Sacramento, but he turned in his resignation the following week. He told his dispatcher he was retiring early, citing health concerns. He never mentioned what happened on Interstate 80, knowing no one would believe him. But sometimes, when he's driving his personal car and happens to glance in the rearview mirror, he sees them. Phantom headlights maintaining perfect distance, synchronized with his every move. They never stay long, just a few seconds, but it's enough to remind him. Enough to make him check his mirrors compulsively. Enough to make him wonder if he ever really left that endless stretch of highway, or if he's still there, driving forward and backward simultaneously, trapped in a loop of reflection and reality that occasionally lets him glimpse the world he used to know. Story 2. The Cargo in Trailer 17. Daniel Reeves specialized in refrigerated transport, the kind of hauling that required precision, attention to detail, and a strong stomach. He transported everything from medical supplies to seafood, from pharmaceutical products to produce. The refrigerated trailers, called reefers in the industry, were temperamental beasts, requiring constant monitoring to maintain exact temperatures. 1 degree off could spoil an entire load worth of thousands of dollars. On a cold March evening, Daniel received an unusual assignment. The dispatcher at his company, Glacier Transport, called him personally rather than sending the usual digital notification. The job was simple on paper. Pick up a loaded reefer from a warehouse facility outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and deliver it to a research facility in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The temperature was to be maintained at exactly 34 degrees Fahrenheit, not a degree higher or lower. Client is paying triple the usual rate, his dispatcher Helen told him. But there are special conditions. You cannot open the trailer under any circumstances. You cannot stop except for fuel and legally required rest breaks. If the temperature deviates by more than half a degree, you must report it immediately. Daniel had hauled sensitive cargo before, but the emphasis on these rules struck him as excessive. "What's in the trailer?" he asked. "Medical research materials," Helen replied. "That's all the manifest says, and that's all we need to know. The client has all the proper permits and documentation. Are you comfortable with this job?" The money was too good to refuse. Daniel agreed and made the drive to the warehouse facility Helen had specified. The address led him to an industrial area on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, where old warehouses with rusted metal siding lined poorly maintained roads. The specific building he needed was at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by an unusually tall chain-link fence topped with razor wire. A security guard checked his ID at the gate, compared it to a clipboard, and waved him through without a word. The warehouse itself was unmarked, no company name or number visible on the exterior. Daniel backed his truck up to the loading dock, and 2 workers, both wearing full hazmat suits, emerged to connect the pre-loaded trailer to his cab. They worked in complete silence, refusing to make eye contact or acknowledge Daniel's attempts at small talk. Within 10 minutes, the trailer was connected. The refrigeration unit was humming at exactly 34 degrees, and Daniel was being waved out of the facility. As he pulled away, he noticed none of the usual paperwork had been completed. No manifest review, no signature confirmation, no seal inspection. The trailer had been sealed before he arrived, a heavy industrial lock with a numbered tag attached. He'd been given a single piece of paper with the delivery address in Minneapolis and a phone number to call when he arrived. The first few hours of the drive were uneventful. Daniel took Interstate 55 north out of Louisiana, the reefer unit humming steadily behind him. He monitored the temperature gauge on his dashboard constantly. It remained locked at exactly 34 degrees. Around midnight, somewhere in Arkansas, he noticed the smell. It started subtle, barely perceptible, just a faint, unpleasant odor that seemed to seep into the cab from somewhere behind him. Daniel checked his reefer unit controls. Everything showed normal. Temperature stable, unit functioning properly, no alerts or warnings. But the smell grew stronger. It wasn't the typical odor of spoiled food or mechanical problems. This was something else, something organic and wrong, like decay mixed with chemicals, with an underlying sweetness that made his throat constrict. Daniel called his dispatcher. "Helen, I'm getting a strange smell from the cargo. Everything shows normal on my end, but I think I should pull over and inspect." "Absolutely not." Helen's response was immediate and firm. "Do not open that trailer, Daniel. I'm serious." The client was very clear. "If you open it, we breach the contract and lose the payment." "Is the temperature stable?" "Yes, exactly 34 degrees." "Then keep driving. Reefer units can produce odd smells sometimes. Just crack your windows and keep moving." Daniel followed her instructions, but opening the windows didn't help. If anything, the smell seemed to intensify, as if something in the trailer was reacting to the fresh air, becoming more active, more pungent. By 2 in the morning, Daniel was driving through Missouri, and the smell had become nearly unbearable. His eyes watered, and he developed a pounding headache that throbbed in time with his heartbeat. He pulled into a rest area, planning to take a legally required break and get some fresh air. As soon as he stopped and climbed out of the cab, the smell hit him like a physical wall. It was emanating from the trailer, strong enough that other truckers in the rest area looked around with disgusted expressions, trying to identify the source. Daniel walked around his trailer, examining it in the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking area. The refrigeration unit was running perfectly, the temperature gauge reading exactly 34 degrees. The seal on the door was intact, the numbered tag undisturbed, but the smell was definitely coming from inside. He put his ear against the trailer's metal wall and listened. Over the hum of the refrigeration unit, he heard something else, a soft, wet sound, like something sliding or shifting inside. Then he heard what sounded unmistakably like a whisper, though he couldn't hear any words. Daniel jumped back from the trailer. His rational mind insisted he'd imagined it, that the sound was just the cargo settling or liquid sloshing in containers. But his instincts screamed that something was wrong, that whatever was in that trailer wasn't medical research materials. He pulled out his phone and called the number he'd been given for the delivery location. After 8 rings, a man answered with a curt yes. "This is Daniel Reeves with Glacier Transport. I'm hauling your cargo to Minneapolis, and I need to know what's in this trailer. There's a smell, and I'm hearing—" "Mr. Reeves," the man interrupted, his voice cold and clinical. "You are being paid to transport, not to investigate. The contents of the trailer are none of your concern. Is the temperature stable?" "Yes, but—" "Then continue your delivery. You should arrive by tomorrow afternoon. Do not open the trailer. Do not deviate from your route. Simply drive." The man hung up. Daniel stood in the rest area parking lot, staring at his trailer. Every instinct told him to walk away, to call the police, to refuse to haul whatever was inside. But he thought about the triple payment, about his mortgage, about his daughter's college tuition. He climbed back into his cab and pulled back onto the interstate. By dawn, the smell had permeated everything. Daniel's clothes reeked of it, his hair, even the interior of his cab seemed saturated with the sickly sweet odor of decay. He stopped noticing it consciously. His brain had adapted, filtering it out. But he could see the reactions of people at gas stations when he went inside to pay. They recoiled, covered their noses, hurried away from him. The sounds from the trailer had also changed. The sliding, shifting noises had become more frequent, and the whispers had grown into something more distinct. He still couldn't make out words, but he could hear what sounded like multiple voices, overlapping, some speaking, some moaning. In Iowa, around mid-morning, Daniel's temperature gauge suddenly spiked. In a span of 30 seconds, the reading jumped from 34 degrees to 42 degrees. Panicked, he pulled onto the shoulder and ran to check the refrigeration unit. It was running full blast, working harder than he'd ever seen a reefer unit work, but the temperature continued to climb. 45 degrees, 48 degrees, 50 degrees. The smell exploded in intensity. Whatever was inside the trailer was degrading rapidly, and the sounds had become frantic, banging against the walls, scratching at the interior and screaming. Actual screaming, high-pitched and agonized, coming from inside a sealed, refrigerated trailer. Daniel called the emergency again. The same clinical voice answered. "What is it, Mr. Reeves?" "The temperature's rising. I can't control it. And there's something alive in here. I can hear." "Mr. Reeves, listen very carefully. You are experiencing auditory hallucinations caused by the biological agents being transported. The material inside produces volatile compounds that can cause hallucinations when inhaled. You must put distance between yourself and the trailer. Walk at least 50 yards away and wait. I'm sending a containment team to your location now." "What the hell is in this trailer?" "Walk away now, Mr. Reeves. 50 yards minimum. Do it now." Daniel dropped the phone and ran. He sprinted away from his truck, putting distance between himself and whatever was screaming inside that trailer. At exactly 50 yards, he stopped and turned to look back. The trailer was rocking on its wheels. Something inside was throwing itself against the walls with enough force to shake the entire semi-truck. The rear doors were bulging outward, the metal warping, the seals straining. And the screaming had become a chorus, dozens of voices crying out in pain or rage or terror. 20 minutes later, 3 black vans arrived at high speed. Personnel in full hazmat suits emerged and surrounded the trailer. They moved with military precision, setting up portable containment barriers, deploying equipment Daniel didn't recognize. One of them injected something into the trailer through a valve Daniel hadn't noticed before. The sound stopped within seconds. The rocking ceased. The trailer settled back into stillness. A man in a hazmat suit approached Daniel, staying exactly 6 feet away. Through the suit's mask, Daniel could see cold, professional eyes. "Mr. Reeves, you've been exposed to Class 4 biological agents. We need you to come with us for decontamination and observation." "What was in that trailer?" Daniel demanded. "What did you make me transport?" The trailer contained failed prototypes from a private research facility. That's all you need to know. You'll be compensated for your time and troubles, plus a substantial bonus for your discretion. You will also sign documentation agreeing never to discuss this incident. Daniel spent 3 days in a private medical facility being tested, decontaminated, and debriefed. He signed documents he wasn't allowed to read, received a payment of $200,000 deposited directly into his account, and was released with a warning that any violation of his non-disclosure agreement would result in immediate legal action. He never drove for Glacier Transport again. In fact, he never drove a semi-truck again. The company listed his employment as terminated due to retirement, and his driving record showed nothing unusual about his final haul. But Daniel still has nightmares about the screaming. In his dreams, he opens the trailer and sees what was inside: 17 stainless steel containers, each with a small window, each containing something that was once human but had been changed, modified, failed experiments that were still alive, still conscious, still screaming for help that would never come. He wakes up smelling that sickly sweet odor of decay and chemicals, and sometimes in the dark hours before dawn, he can still hear them whispering. Story 3. The Phantom Fuel Stop. Raymond Torres had been running overnight routes through the Southwest for 12 years, specializing in the Arizona-New Mexico corridor. He knew every truck stop, every rest area, every shortcut, and every speed trap between Phoenix and Albuquerque. The desert highways were his domain, and he prided himself on efficiency and punctuality. On a September night, Raymond was hauling construction equipment from Phoenix to Santa Fe, running slightly behind schedule due to a delayed loading. He'd pushed through the evening, making good time on Interstate 40, planning to fuel up at his usual stop in Hallbrook before continuing east. But as he approached Hallbrook around midnight, he noticed his fuel gauge dropping faster than it should. He'd filled up in Phoenix and should have had plenty to reach Hallbrook with reserves to spare, but the needle was hovering near a quarter tank. Not critical, but concerning. Raymond decided to fuel up sooner rather than risk running low in the stretches of empty highway ahead. He knew there was a truck stop about 30 miles before Hallbrook, a smaller independent station he'd passed many times but never used, always preferring the larger chain stops with better fuel prices and amenities. He took the exit, following signs that pointed toward the truck stop. The off-ramp curved away from the interstate, descending into the darkness of the desert. The road was older than he remembered, the pavement cracked and patched, the lane markings faded almost to invisibility. After about 2 miles, he saw lights ahead, the familiar glow of a truck stop, bright islands of illumination in the vast darkness of the desert. The sign read Desert Star Fuel and Service in red neon, with an animated star that blinked on and off. Raymond pulled into the facility, noting immediately that something felt off. The place was too clean, pristine, the pavement perfect, the pumps gleaming as if brand new. But the style of everything, the architecture, the signage, the design of the fuel pumps, looked like it was from the 1970s. Several other semi-trucks were parked in the lot, their running lights glowing, but Raymond didn't see any drivers. The main building, a low structure with large windows, showed lights inside but no visible movement. He pulled up to one of the diesel pumps and shut down his engine. The silence of the desert settled around him, profound and oppressive. Usually, truck stops buzzed with activity even in the middle of the night. Drivers refueling, conversations, the rumble of idling engines. This place was silent except for a soft electrical hum coming from the neon sign. Raymond climbed out of his cab and approached the fuel pump. It was an old-style pump, the kind with mechanical numbers that flipped rather than a digital display. He tried to swipe his fuel card, but there was no card reader, just a handwritten sign that said "Pay inside." He walked toward the main building, his boots echoing loudly on the pavement. Through the windows, he could see a brightly lit interior, aisles of snacks and drinks, display cases of hot food, shelves of trucker supplies, but still no people. The door chimed with an old-fashioned bell as he entered. The interior was immaculate, everything perfectly arranged, the floor polished to a shine. Music played from hidden speakers, instrumental versions of songs Raymond recognized from his childhood in the 1980s. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s, wearing a clean attendant's uniform with a name tag that read Earl. He smiled at Raymond with perfect white teeth. "Evening, friend. What can I help you with?" "Need to fill up with diesel," Raymond said, gesturing toward his truck outside. "Pump 6. Earl nodded and pulled out an old-fashioned ledger book, opening it to a page filled with handwritten entries. "You got it. Just fill her up and come back to settle when you're done." Raymond hesitated. "You don't have card readers. I need a receipt for my company." "I can write you up a receipt, no problem," Earl assured him. "We're a little old-fashioned here, but we've got the best fuel prices on this route. You'll see." Something about the man's smile made Raymond uncomfortable, but he needed fuel. He returned to his truck and began pumping diesel. The pump worked perfectly, the mechanical numbers flipping steadily as gallons accumulated. He watched his tank fill, noting that the pump ran unusually fast, faster than modern pumps with their flow restrictors and safety features. When the tank was full, Raymond checked the pump total. 68 gallons at $1.12 per gallon. He stared at the number, confused. Diesel was currently running around $3.50 a gallon. These prices hadn't existed since the early 1980s. He walked back inside, where Earl was wiping down the already spotless counter. "There's something wrong with your pump," Raymond said. "The price is showing way too low." Earl chuckled. "No mistake, friend, that's our price. Comes out to $76.16. Cash or check?" Raymond pulled out his wallet, his hands trembling slightly. He extracted $80 in cash and handed it to Earl, who made change from an old-style register, the mechanical kind with keys and a drawer that popped open with a bell. Earl wrote out a receipt by hand on a carbon copy form, tearing off the top sheet and handing it to Raymond. "You drive safe now," he said, that unsettling smile never wavering. "Long way to go before sunrise." Raymond took the receipt and hurried back to his truck. As he climbed into the cab, he noticed the other trucks parked in the lot were all older models, 1970s and 1980s era semis, not a modern truck among them. And now that he looked more carefully, they all appeared dusty, as if they'd been parked there for a very long time. He started his engine and pulled away from the pump, eager to get back to the interstate. As he circled through the parking lot toward the exit, his headlights swept across one of the parked trucks. In the cab, he could see a figure, a driver slumped over the steering wheel, completely still. Raymond slowed down, concerned the driver might need help. But as his headlights fully illuminated the cab, he saw that the driver wasn't sleeping. The man's face was gray, his eyes sunken, his mouth open in a silent scream. He'd been dead for a very long time. Heart pounding, Raymond accelerated toward the exit, his trailer swaying with the sudden speed. He glanced at the other parked trucks as he passed them. Each one contained a body, drivers who had stopped for fuel and never left. The exit road curved back toward the interstate, but as Raymond drove, he realized the road was changing. The pavement grew rougher, more cracked, and weeds pushed through deteriorating asphalt. The road seemed to be aging before his eyes, deteriorating from well-maintained pavement to abandoned wreckage. He pushed the accelerator harder, his truck bouncing over potholes and cracks. The lights of the Desert Star fuel and service receded behind him. His mirrors, the facility looked different. The lights were dimmer. The neon sign was broken. The buildings appeared old and damaged. Finally, he reached the interstate. The moment his truck merged back onto I-40, everything snapped back to normal. The road was smooth. His GPS showed his correct location, and the time on his dashboard clock read 12:47 a.m., the same time it had been when he'd exited 40 minutes earlier. Raymond drove straight through to Santa Fe without stopping, his fuel gauge showing 3/4 full despite having traveled several hundred miles. The receipt Earl had given him was in his pocket, but when he pulled it out at his delivery destination, it wasn't a fuel receipt anymore. It was an obituary, yellowed with age, for a man named Raymond Torres, deceased in 1984. Truck driver, lost in the desert, cause of death unknown. Raymond stared at the obituary for a long time. The newspaper was dated September 1984, exactly 41 years before this night. The photo showed a man who looked exactly like him, the same face, the same eyes, the same small scar on his chin from a childhood bicycle accident. He pulled up Google Maps and searched for Desert Star fuel and service. The location existed, but when he switched to satellite view, all he could see was an abandoned ruin, crumbled buildings, broken pavement, and several rusted truck hulks that had been sitting there for decades. Raymond filed his delivery paperwork and began the drive home, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. The dead drivers in their trucks, the smiling attendant named Earl, the impossibly low fuel prices from 40 years ago, and that obituary in his pocket, an alternate history where he died in the desert in 1984, perhaps having stopped at the Desert Star fuel and service and never left. He never took that exit again. In fact, he began avoiding that entire stretch of Interstate 40, taking longer routes that added hours to his trips. His dispatcher questioned the inefficiency, but Raymond couldn't explain the truth. that somewhere along that highway, there was a place unstuck in time, a trap that caught drivers and held them forever, making them part of its collection of permanent guests. Sometimes, late at night, Raymond pulls out that yellowed obituary and reads it again. He wonders if somewhere in another timeline, another version of himself did stop at the Desert Star in 1984 and never left. He wonders if that version is slumped over the steering wheel of an old semi-truck, waiting for sunrise that will never come. And he wonders if, someday, the Desert Star fuel and service will find him again, appearing suddenly on his route, its red neon star blinking invitingly, Earl standing behind the counter with that perfect smile, ready to write up another receipt that will never expire. Story 4. The Overtaking Game. Christine Mallory had been driving commercially for 7 years, one of the relatively few women in long-haul trucking, and she'd proven herself more than capable in an industry that still skewed overwhelmingly male. She ran general freight across the Midwest and Plains states, comfortable with the long solitary hours and the rhythm of the road. On a February night, Christine was hauling a load of furniture from Indianapolis to Denver, running Interstate 70 through Kansas. The weather was cold but clear, the roads dry, traffic light in the late evening hours. She demade this run dozens of times and knew the route by heart. The long, flat stretches through Kansas wheat country, the small towns with their scattered lights, the gradual climb toward Colorado and the western part of the state. Around 10 o'clock, somewhere between Salina and Hayes, she noticed a truck behind her. Nothing unusual about that. Trucks traveled in loose clusters, sometimes maintaining similar speeds for hours. But this truck seemed determined to stay exactly behind her, matching her speed precisely. Christine was cruising at 68 miles per hour, slightly under the speed limit, conserving fuel. The truck behind her maintained the same speed, never closing the distance, never falling back. After about 20 minutes, she decided to let him pass. She slowed to 62, moving into the right lane to give the other driver room. The truck behind her slowed as well, dropping to 62, staying directly behind her. Christine frowned and accelerated back to 68. The truck behind her matched her speed immediately. She tried the CB radio. "Driver behind me on 70 westbound, mile marker 253, you trying to pass or what? You're making me nervous back there." No response. The CB remained silent except for the usual distant chatter from other drivers far away on different stretches of highway. She tried again. "Westbound driver, silver Freightliner with a red trailer, you're riding pretty close. What's your handle?" Still nothing. Christine checked her mirrors more carefully now, trying to make out details of the truck behind her. It was indeed a silver Freightliner with a red trailer, but she couldn't see the cab clearly. The washed out the details, and the running lights seemed strangely bright, almost too bright, casting the cab itself into shadow. She made a decision. At the next mile marker, she would accelerate hard, putting distance between herself and this annoying driver. When mile marker 260 appeared, Christine pushed the accelerator down, her Detroit diesel responding with a surge of power. Her speedometer climbed to 75, then 80. The truck behind her kept pace effortlessly, the distance between them unchanged. Christine felt a chill run down her spine. She was pushing her rig harder than she normally would, definitely exceeding safe speeds for a loaded truck, and this other driver was matching her without any apparent effort. She slowed back down to 68, and of course, so did her shadow. For the next 30 miles, the situation continued unchanged. The silver Freightliner stayed locked behind her, never attempting to pass, never falling back, maintaining that same unsettling, precise distance. Christine's hands grew clammy on the steering wheel, and she found herself checking her mirrors compulsively every few seconds. Then things got worse. A third truck appeared in front of her, also a silver Freightliner with a red trailer. It was traveling slightly slower than Christine, maybe 65 miles per hour, and she was gradually overtaking it. As she pulled alongside, preparing to pass, she glanced over at the other truck's cab. The driver was a woman who looked exactly like her. Christine jerked the wheel instinctively, swerving slightly before regaining control. She stared at the other driver, who turned to look directly at her. The woman in the other truck had Christine's face, her hair, her jacket, everything. The other Christine smiled and waved, a friendly greeting between fellow drivers. Christine accelerated hard, passing the other truck as quickly as possible, her heart hammering in her chest. She grabbed her CB radio with a shaking hand. "This isn't funny. Whoever you are, this isn't funny." A voice came back on the CB, her own voice, calm and pleasant. "What isn't funny, Christine? I'm just driving, same as you." "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm you," the voice replied simply. "Or you're me. Does it matter?" Christine threw the CB handset down and focused on driving, trying to put distance between herself and the duplicate truck. But when she checked her mirrors, she saw that the silver Freightliner was still behind her, and now there were two of them, both matching her speed, both staying in perfect formation. A sign appeared ahead: "Hayes, exit 159, 12 miles. Christine decided she would take that exit, pull into a truck stop, find other people, and end this nightmare. 12 miles. She could do this for 12 more miles, but the miles seemed to stretch impossibly long. Her odometer showed distance accumulating, but the sign for Hayes never got any closer. 5 miles passed, then 7, then 10. The exit sign still read 12 miles, and more trucks appeared. First, another silver Freightliner pulled alongside her on the left, the driver again Christine herself, who waved cheerfully. Then another appeared on her right, then two more ahead of her, bracketing her lane. Within minutes, Christine was surrounded by duplicates of her own truck, all driven by duplicates of herself, all maintaining precise formation. She was trapped in a moving box of identical trucks. The CBs in all the trucks crackled to life simultaneously, and her own voice spoke from a dozen radios at once. "Do you remember the accident, Christine? Do you remember what happened in Kansas?" Christine's blood went cold. "What accident? There was no accident." "Are you sure?" The chorus of voices asked. "Think carefully. Think about that night 3 years ago, this same stretch of highway, the icy roads, the truck that didn't stop in time." Fragmented memories suddenly surfaced in Christine's mind, memories she didn't remember having before. Black ice on the highway, her truck sliding, the horrible crunch of impact, the sensation of rolling, tumbling, the world spinning. Pain, darkness, silence. "No," she whispered. "No, that didn't happen. I'm fine. I'm here. I'm driving." "You've been driving this same stretch of highway for 3 years," the voices said gently, almost kindly. "You've passed Hayes 1,000 times, but you never reach it. You're stuck, Christine. You're caught in the moment, replaying it over and over." The trucks around her began to fade, becoming translucent. Through them, Christine could see twisted metal, could see her own truck, her real truck, crushed and overturned in a ditch beside Interstate 70. She could see emergency lights, ambulances, state patrol vehicles. "I'm not dead," she said firmly. "This is a trick, some kind of hallucination." "Look at your hands," the voices urged. Christine looked down at her hands, gripping the steering wheel. They were translucent like the trucks around her. She could see through them to the dashboard below. "Every night you drive this route," the voices continued. "Every night you try to reach Hayes. Every night you encounter us, other versions of yourself, other loops in the same moment. We're all you, Christine. We're all the same driver, stuck in the same instant, unable to move forward, unable to stop." Christine, her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to be dead." "None of us do," the voices said softly. "But you are, we all are. The only question is whether you accept it and find peace or keep driving forever." When Christine opened her eyes, the other trucks were gone. She was alone on the highway, driving through darkness. The sign ahead read, "Hayes, exit 159, 12 miles. She drove for what felt like hours, maybe days. The exit never came. The road never ended. The sun never rose. She existed in perpetual night, perpetual motion, perpetual Kansas. 3 years later, or was it 3 minutes, another truck appeared behind her. Christine watched in her mirror as it matched her speed, maintaining precise distance. She picked up her CB radio. "Driver behind me on 70 westbound," she said in a calm, pleasant voice. "Do you remember the accident? Do you remember what happened in Kansas?" The new driver, whoever she was, whatever her name had been, would deny it at first. They always did. But eventually they would understand, just as Christine had understood. They would join the endless convoy of drivers stuck on an infinite loop of Interstate 70, forever approaching haze, never arriving, driving through a night that would never end. Christine accelerated to match the new driver's speed, and two more versions of herself appeared ahead. The convoy was forming again, the same pattern repeating, the same dance of realization and acceptance. Somewhere in the real world, emergency workers had cleared the wreckage of her truck 3 years ago. Her family had held a funeral. Her company had filed insurance claims. Life had moved on without Christine Mallory. But here, in this eternal moment on a Kansas highway, she drove on. And she would drive forever, picking up new companions who'd had their own fatal accidents on this same stretch of road, all of them caught together in a purgatory of chrome and diesel and endless white lines disappearing into darkness. The exit sign still read 12 miles. It would always read 12 miles. Story 5. The Silent Town. Gary Patterson had been an owner-operator for 15 years, running his own truck and choosing his own loads. He preferred smaller jobs that took him through back roads and rural areas rather than the interstate highways. The pay was sometimes lower, but he enjoyed the scenery and the slower pace. In late October, Gary accepted a delivery of agricultural equipment to a town called Ashwood Falls, population 800, located in rural Montana. The town was off the beaten path, accessible by a 2-lane state highway wound through forests and mountains. Gary's GPS showed the route clearly enough, though it warned of limited cell coverage in the area. He left Billings in the early afternoon, planning to reach Ashwood Falls before dark. The drive was pleasant at first, golden autumn colors, clean mountain air coming through his cracked window, the satisfying hum of his engine as it tackled the gradual climb into the hills. By late afternoon, as the sun began its descent, Gary turned onto the final stretch of road leading to Ashwood Falls. According to his GPS, the town was only 15 miles away. The road narrowed to barely 2 lanes, trees pressing close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the remaining daylight. After about 20 minutes, Gary rounded a curve and saw a sign. "Welcome to Ashwood Falls, population 800, established 1892. But something was wrong with the sign. It was old, the paint faded and peeling, and someone had spray-painted "Leave" across it in dripping red letters. Gary slowed his truck as he entered the town. The main street stretched ahead of him, lined with old buildings, shops, a diner, a hardware store, a post office. All of them looked abandoned. Windows were boarded up, paint was peeling, and weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalks. The whole town had the feel of a place that had been deserted for decades. But his GPS insisted this was Ashwood Falls, and the delivery address indicated the farm equipment should be dropped at a warehouse on the north end of town. Gary continued driving slowly down the main street, looking for any signs of life. The town was utterly silent. No people, no cars, no dogs barking, no birds singing. Just silence and stillness, as if the entire place was holding its breath. Gary's skin prickled with unease. He picked up his CB radio. "Anyone out there?" "This is Gary Patterson approaching Ashwood Falls, Montana, looking for directions to Riverside Warehouse." "Anyone copy?" Static answered him. Not even the usual distant chatter of other drivers, just empty, hissing static. He continued through town, passing a gas station with empty pumps and shattered windows, a church with its steeple tilted at a wrong angle, a school with playground equipment rusted into frozen positions. The more he saw, the more certain he became that this town had been abandoned long ago. But then why was his delivery here? Why had the customer provided this address? Gary pulled out the paperwork and checked it again. Riverside Warehouse, 147 Road, Ashwood Falls, Montana. The order had been placed 2 weeks ago. Confirmation received. Payment verified. He reached the north end of town and found Mill Road, turning onto it. The warehouse appeared after a quarter mile. A large metal building with a loading dock, looking much newer than the rest of the town. And unlike everything else, this building appeared maintained, the area around it clear of weeds, the parking area freshly graveled. Gary pulled up to the loading dock and stopped. No one came out to meet him. He honked his horn, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. Still no response. After waiting 5 minutes, Gary climbed out of his cab and approached the warehouse. A regular door stood next to the main loading bay, and he tried the handle. It opened easily. "Hello," Gary called into the dim interior. "Delivery from Patterson Transport. Anyone here?" His voice echoed in the empty space. Gary's eyes adjusted to the dimness, and he saw that the warehouse was completely empty. No equipment, no inventory, nothing but bare concrete floors and metal walls. Except for one thing. In the center of the floor, someone had arranged dozens of photographs in a circle, the edges touching, forming a perfect ring about 20 feet in diameter. Gary approached cautiously and saw that all the photographs showed the same subject: his truck. There were pictures of his truck from various angles and locations. On highways, at truck stops, parked at loading docks. Some of the photos appeared to be several years old, judging by minor damage to his rig that had since been repaired. Other photos were recent. He recognized scenes from earlier this week. Someone had been following him, photographing him for years. Gary stumbled backward, his heart racing. He needed to leave immediately. He turned and ran back to his truck, climbed into the cab and started the engine. He threw the transmission into reverse and began backing away from the warehouse. As he turned the truck around, preparing to speed back through town, he saw them. People were standing in the street, blocking his path. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all perfectly still, all facing him. Men, women, children, all wearing outdated clothing from different eras. 1950s dresses, 1970s leisure suits, 1980s styles, more recent clothes. They stood in complete silence, not moving, not speaking, just watching him with empty expressions. Gary honked his horn. None of them reacted. He honked again, longer, more insistent. They didn't move. He edged the truck forward slowly, hoping they would get out of the way. They remained motionless until the front bumper was almost touching the nearest person, a woman in a faded blue dress. Then, as one, they all stepped aside, parting to create a path just wide enough for his truck. Gary drove through them, his hands shaking on the wheel. The silent crowd lined both sides of the street, hundreds of eyes watching him pass. He recognized some of their faces from missing person posters he'd seen at truck stops over the years, drivers who'd disappeared, people who'd vanished on rural highways. As he passed, some of them reached out slowly and touched his truck, their palms pressing against the metal, fingers trailing along the trailer. Gary felt each touch like a physical weight, as if they were trying to hold him there, trying to add him to their collection. The crowd extended the entire length of the main street. Gary drove as fast as he dared, desperate to reach the edge of town. The silent people kept touching his truck as he passed, leaving handprints that glowed faintly in the gathering darkness. Finally, he cleared the last of them and accelerated hard, his truck roaring as he pushed it to its limits on the narrow road leading out of Ashwood Falls. He glanced in his mirrors and saw the crowd standing in the street behind him, motionless, watching him go. The "Welcome to Ashwood Falls" sign appeared ahead, and Gary nearly sobbed with relief as he passed it, leaving the town behind. The trees opened up, the road widened, and normal cell phone signal returned with a cascade of delayed notifications. Gary pulled over at the first opportunity and tried to report what he'd seen, calling both the police and his dispatcher. But when he provided the address of Ashwood Falls and tried to explain, both conversations ended the same way. "Sir, there's no town called Ashwood Falls in Montana. Are you sure about the name?" Gary insisted, providing GPS coordinates and detailed descriptions. The dispatcher checked mapping databases, county records, and state directories. There was no Ashwood Falls, Montana. There never had been. The delivery address he'd been given led to coordinates in the middle of national forest land, nowhere near any town. The customer who'd placed the order didn't exist. The phone number went to a disconnected line. The payment had been processed, but the bank couldn't trace where the money had actually come from. Gary never found an explanation for what happened that day. He kept the delivery paperwork as proof, but even that was fading, the ink slowly disappearing as if the entire incident was erasing itself from reality. He continued driving, but he never accepted a delivery to rural Montana. And sometimes, when he's driving on isolated back roads, he sees them in his peripheral vision, silent figures standing by the roadside, watching him pass, waiting patiently for him to make the mistake of stopping, of investigating, of staying too long in a town that shouldn't exist. The handprints they left on his truck never completely washed away. In certain light, at certain angles, you can still see them. Ghostly outlines of palms and fingers, dozens of them. The marks of people who reached out from a town that wasn't there, trying to pull one more driver into their silent, eternal vigil. Story 6. The Backwards Clock. Jesse Hammond specialized in time-sensitive deliveries, the kind where every minute mattered. Pharmaceuticals, emergency medical equipment, critical auto parts for assembly lines. If it absolutely had to be there by a specific time, Jesse was the driver companies called. He had a perfect on-time record over 8 years, and he was fiercely proud of it. In early December, Jesse received an urgent delivery request. Medical equipment from St. Louis to Kansas City, deadline 8 a.m. sharp for a scheduled surgery. The drive normally took 4 hours, and Jesse left at 11 p.m., giving himself an extra hour buffer for any problems. The weather was cold but clear, traffic was light, and everything went smoothly as Jesse merged onto Interstate 70 westbound. He settled into his usual driving rhythm, monitoring his ETA constantly on his GPS, making minor adjustments to his speed to optimize fuel efficiency while maintaining his schedule. Around 1:30 a.m., somewhere past Columbia, Jesse noticed something odd. His dashboard clock, which had been showing 1:32 a.m., suddenly displayed 1:31 a.m. He blinked and looked again. 1:30 a.m. The clock was running backward. Jesse tapped the display, thinking it was malfunctioning. The clock continued backward. 1:29 a.m., 1:28 a.m., 1:27 a.m. He checked his cell phone. The time on his phone showed 1:32 a.m., still running forward normally. But his dashboard clock continued its backward progression, now showing 1:25 a.m. "Just a glitch," Jesse muttered, making a mental note to have it checked. He focused on the road, using his phone for time reference instead. But then his phone's clock also began running backward. 1:31 a.m., 1:30 a.m., 1:29 a.m. Jesse stopped with unease. Electronic glitches didn't synchronize across different devices like this. He looked at his wristwatch, an old analog watch his father had given him, purely mechanical, no electronics. The second hand was moving counterclockwise. "What the hell?" Jesse said aloud. He checked his GPS, which showed his position on Interstate 70, approximately mile marker 180, with an ETA to Kansas City of 6:15 a.m. But as he watched, the ETA began increasing. 6:16 a.m., 6:18 a.m., 6:20 a.m. He wasn't slowing down. His speedometer showed a steady 70 miles per hour, but according to the GPS, he was somehow taking longer to reach his destination. Then Jesse noticed something that made his blood run cold. The mile markers were decreasing. He just passed mile marker 178, but the next marker he saw read 179, then 180. The markers were counting upward even though he was driving westbound when they should be counting downward. He was driving forward but somehow moving backward. Jesse's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He considered pulling over, but the idea of stopping while reality itself seemed to be malfunctioning terrified him. He pushed on, trying to make sense of what was happening. His dashboard clock now showed 12:58 a.m. His phone showed 12:55 a.m. His watch showed approximately 12:50. He'd lost 40 minutes in the span of what felt like 5 minutes. The other traffic on the highway was behaving strangely too. Cars passed him going westbound, but they appeared to be moving in reverse, their taillights facing him. Eastbound traffic in the opposite lanes looked normal, or was it? Jesse couldn't tell anymore what was normal and what wasn't. A sign appeared ahead. Columbia, exit 127, 23 miles. But Jesse had left Columbia behind almost an hour ago. He should be approaching Kingdom City, not heading back toward Columbia. He was retracing his route, going backward through his own journey, even though he was driving forward the entire time. Jesse's CB radio crackled to life. A voice came through, distorted and strange, speaking words that seemed to come in reverse order. "Help need you stop, don't forward keep." "Who is this?" Jesse demanded. "What's happening?" The voice came again, still reversed. "Reality from falling your loop temporal the broke you." Jesse felt panic rising in his chest. He pressed the accelerator harder, pushing his speed up to 75, then 80, as if he could somehow outrun whatever was happening to him. But the faster he drove, time seemed to reverse. His clock showed midnight now. Then 11:45 p.m. Then 11:30 p.m. He was rapidly approaching the time he'd started his journey in St. Louis. And then Jesse saw something that made him want to scream. Ahead of him on the highway, driving in the same direction, was his own truck. Same model, same company logo, same license plate. He was catching up to himself. As he pulled closer, he could see through the windshield of the other truck. He could see himself driving, wearing the same clothes, the same expression of concentration he always wore while driving. The CB radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer because it was his own voice. "Don't stop, keep forward, you broke the temporal loop, you're falling from reality." Jesse understood suddenly that he was hearing his future self, warning him from farther ahead in the time loop. The message was reversed because he was traveling backward through time, receiving transmissions from himself before he'd sent them. He grabbed his CB handset. "This is Jesse Hammond. If anyone can hear this, I need help. Time is running backward. I'm stuck in some kind of loop." He heard his own message come back to him seconds later, reversed. "Loop of kind, some in stuck, I'm backward running, is time, help need I Hammond Jesse is this." The truck ahead, his past self, suddenly swerved. Jesse watched in horror as his own past self's truck lost control, sliding across lanes. He was watching the accident that had already happened, the accident he didn't remember having, the accident that had started this nightmare. His past self's truck hit the highway barrier, the impact sending the rig into a sideways slide. The trailer jackknifed, and the whole truck began to roll. Jesse slammed on his brakes, trying to avoid colliding with his own accident. His truck shuddered and slowed, and as it did, time began to run forward again. The clock stopped their backward progress, hesitated, then began ticking forward. The accident ahead of him reversed itself like a film running backward. The truck unrolled, unjackknifed, straightened out, and continued driving as if nothing had happened. Jesse found himself stopped in the right lane of Interstate 70, his truck idling, his hands shaking uncontrollably on the wheel. His dashboard clock showed 1:47 a.m. His phone showed 1:47 a.m. His watch showed approximately 1:47 a.m. All synchronized, all running forward normally. He checked his GPS. He was at mile marker 175, exactly where he should be, with an ETA to Kansas 6:15 a.m. Everything was normal again, but Jesse knew what he'd experienced was real. He'd been caught in a temporal loop, traveling backward through time, witnessing his own accident from both sides, as the victim and as the observer. He sat in his stopped truck for several minutes, trying to calm his breathing, trying to process what had happened. Other trucks passed him, normal traffic, normal speeds, normal reality. Finally, Jesse put his truck in gear and continued westbound. He completed the delivery to Kansas City, arriving at exactly 8 a.m., maintaining his perfect on-time record. He filed his delivery paperwork, accepted his payment, and said nothing to anyone about what had occurred on the highway. But Jesse started noticing strange discontinuities in his life after that night. Sometimes he'd experience déjà vu so strong it was disorienting. Entire conversations he was certain he'd had before. Places he'd definitely visited previously, though he had no memory of it. People who seemed to recognize him, though he'd never met them. He began to suspect that he hadn't actually escaped the time loop. Instead, he'd been cycling through the same stretch of highway, the same delivery, the same night over and over, accumulating memories from each iteration but never quite breaking free completely. Each time through the loop, he made slightly different choices, took slightly different actions, but the outcome was always the same, arriving in Kansas City at 8 a.m. on time, maintaining his perfect record. How many times had he driven that route? 10, 100, 1,000. Jesse didn't know, couldn't know, because each loop reset his memory of the previous iterations, leaving only fragments, echoes, déjà vu. Sometimes he catches sight of his own truck in the distance, ahead of him or behind him, and he knows he's watching another version of himself in another iteration of the loop. Sometimes his CB radio picks up his own voice, warning himself, trying to break free. And every time he drives westbound on Interstate 70, somewhere around mile marker 180, his clocks begin to slow down. They haven't run backward again, not yet, but they hesitate just for a moment, as if considering which direction to go. Jesse still maintains his perfect on-time record. He's never late, never early, always precisely on time. Because when you're stuck in a time loop, repeating the same journey endlessly, perfection becomes inevitable. You just have to accept that you might be driving the same route forever, delivering the same cargo to the same destination, living the same hours again until time itself forgets which direction it's supposed to flow. Story 7. The truck stopped at MOVED. Linda Morrison had been running West Coast routes for 6 years, primarily between Seattle and Los Angeles along Interstate 5. She knew every truck stop, rest area, and fuel station along the 600-mile stretch of highway, knew which ones had the best coffee, the cleanest showers, the friendliest staff. Her favorite stop was a place called Mountain View Truck Plaza, located about 2 hours north of Sacramento. It was a mid-sized facility with excellent amenities, hot food, clean restrooms, a driver's lounge with comfortable seating, and most importantly, genuinely kind staff who remembered regular drivers by name. Linda stopped at Mountain View at least twice a week, usually during her southbound runs, and had been doing so for over 3 years. She'd celebrated her birthday there, taken shelter during storms, and even spent one Christmas Eve in their parking lot, sharing coffee and stories with other stranded drivers. So when Linda pulled off Interstate 5 in early November, expecting to see the familiar Mountain View Truck Plaza at exit 212, she was shocked to find nothing but an empty lot. The exit ramp was there. The service road was there. But where the truck stop should have been, there was only dirt, weeds, and a few scattered pieces of concrete foundation. Linda sat in her idling truck, staring at the empty space in confusion. She checked her GPS, which clearly showed Mountain View Truck Plaza at this location. She checked her phone's map app, same thing. but her eyes showed her an abandoned lot that looked like it had been empty for years. She got out of her truck and walked around the area. There were no signs of recent demolition, no construction equipment, no indication that a building had stood here recently. The scattered concrete pieces were old, weathered, partially buried. This place had been empty for a long time, but Linda had been here 3 days ago. She stopped for dinner and fuel, talked to Carol behind the counter about Carol's daughter's college acceptance, bought a sandwich and chips. That had been 3 days ago. Linda pulled out her phone and called the main number for Mountain View Truck Plaza. The call went to a recording. "The number you have dialed is not in service." She tried searching for the truck stop online. Nothing came up. No website, no reviews, no business listing. It was as if Mountain View Truck Plaza had never existed. Growing increasingly unsettled, Linda walked back to her truck and pulled out her receipt folder. She kept every fuel receipt, every purchase, meticulously organized for tax purposes. She flipped through recent receipts looking for her purchase from 3 days ago. The receipt was there, dated 3 days earlier, showing her food purchase and diesel fuel. But the header didn't say Mountain View Truck Plaza. It said Willow Creek Travel Center, exit 212 I-5. Linda stared at the receipt. She'd never heard of Willow Creek Travel Center. She'd been stopping at Mountain View Truck Plaza for 3 years, not some place called Willow Creek. She checked other receipts from previous stops. All of them said Willow Creek Travel Center. 6 months of receipts, all showing the same unfamiliar name, even though Linda had vivid memories of Mountain View, of Carol and the other staff, of the layout of the building and where everything was located. Feeling dizzy, Linda sat in her truck and tried to make sense of what was happening. She called her dispatcher. "Hey Tom, quick question. You know that truck stop I always use on I-5 north of Sacramento? What's it called?" "You mean Willow Creek," Tom replied. "Yeah, you stop there all the time. Why? I thought it was called Mountain View." "Nope, definitely Willow Creek. I've got your fuel reports right here. You've been stopping there regularly for years. You feeling okay, Linda?" "Yeah, fine, just confused. Thanks, Tom." Linda hung up and sat in silence, her mind racing. Every record said Willow Creek. Her dispatcher said Willow Creek, but her memories clearly showed Mountain View, the name on the sign, the logos on the coffee cups, Carol's name tag that read Mountain View Truck Plaza underneath her name. Unable to accept this inconsistency, Linda decided to continue to the next truck stop and talk to other drivers, see if anyone else remembered Mountain View. She merged back onto Interstate 5 and continued southbound. About 40 miles down the highway, she saw a woman standing on the shoulder, thumb out, clearly hitchhiking. Linda normally didn't pick up hitchhikers, company policy and personal safety concerns, but something about the woman looked familiar. As she passed, Linda glanced over and her heart nearly stopped. The woman was Carol, the counter attendant from Mountain View Truck Plaza. Linda pulled over immediately, stopping her truck on the shoulder about 50 yards past the hitchhiker. In her mirror, she watched Carol walking toward her truck. Linda climbed out of the cab and hurried back to meet her. "Carol," Linda called out. "Carol, what are you doing out here?" The woman stopped walking, a look of confusion crossing her face. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "It's me, Linda Morrison. I stop at your truck stop all the time. We just talked 3 days ago about your daughter getting into Oregon State." Carol's face went pale. "How do you know about my daughter?" "You told me." 3 days ago at Mountain View Truck Plaza. Mountain View, Carol repeated the name slowly as if trying to remember something buried deep. "There's no I don't work at," she trailed off, her expression becoming distant, troubled. "Carol, what happened? Why are you hitchhiking? Where's the truck stop?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Carol said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've never worked at any truck stop. I'm a teacher. I teach 3rd grade in Reading." "No, you work at Mountain View Truck Plaza, exit 212 on I-5. You've been there for years." Carol backed away, shaking her head. "You're confused, or you're confusing me with someone else. Please just leave me alone." She turned and walked quickly back toward the highway, leaving Linda standing on the shoulder in bewilderment. Linda watched her go, then returned to her truck and continued driving, her hands shaking on the wheel. Over the next 2 weeks, Linda became obsessed with Mountain View Truck Plaza. She searched online exhaustively, finding nothing. She talked to dozens of other drivers who regularly used Interstate 5. None of them had heard of it. She drove to exit 212 multiple times, always finding only the empty lot. But her memories remained crystal clear. She could describe every detail of Mountain View: the layout, the menu, the prices, the staff. She had memories of specific conversations, specific meals, specific fuel stops spanning 3 years. Then Linda discovered something that made the mystery even stranger. She found an old local newspaper archive from 20 years earlier, containing an article about a truck stop called Mountain View Truck Plaza that had burned down in a catastrophic fire. The article mentioned several staff members who had died in the blaze, including the manager, Carol Henderson. The photo accompanying the article showed Carol, the same Carol Linda had been talking to for 3 years, the same Carol she'd seen hitchhiking on the highway, unchanged by 2 decades. Linda realized she'd been stopping at a place that no longer existed, interacting with people who were dead, creating receipts and records that altered themselves to match a reality where Mountain View had never burned down, or had been rebuilt under a different name, or had never existed at all. The more Linda investigated, the more the fabric of reality seemed to shift around her memories. People she knew started forgetting they'd ever met Mountain View. Receipts changed, showing different names, different dates. Even her own logbooks began to contradict her memories. She started experiencing other inconsistencies. Exits that should have been at specific mile markers appeared in different locations. Towns she'd driven through dozens of times had different names. Routes she'd traveled for years led to unfamiliar destinations. Linda realized that by noticing Mountain View's absence, by refusing to accept the altered reality, she'd somehow become unstuck from the consistent timeline everyone else occupied. She was experiencing constant small shifts in reality, seeing the changes that others accepted automatically without noticing. She stopped trying to explain it to people. Instead, she kept detailed journals, writing down everything she observed, every inconsistency, every change. She filled notebook after notebook with observations of a world that couldn't quite decide what was real and what wasn't. And sometimes, when she passes exit 212 on Interstate 5, she sees Mountain View Truck Plaza there, fully operational, lights blazing, parking lot full of trucks. She can see Carol through the windows, working behind the counter. The place looks exactly as Linda remembers it, but Linda doesn't stop anymore, because she knows that if she pulls in, if she goes inside, she might never leave. She might become like Carol, trapped in a place that exists in memory but not in reality, hitchhiking on a highway in the wrong timeline, trying to find her way back to a world that's forgotten her. So Linda drives past, making note in her journal. Exit 212, Mountain View visible today, 3:45 p.m., lasted approximately 40 seconds before fading. And she continues southbound, toward a Lowe's Angels that might or might not be where she remembers it, delivering cargo to warehouses that might have different names tomorrow, driving through a world that shifts and changes when no one's looking. The only constant is the highway itself, the endless ribbon of asphalt, and Linda drives it faithfully, one of the few people who notices when reality revises itself, who remembers the places and people who have been edited out of existence. Sometimes she wonders if she herself is becoming one of those edited things, if other drivers will start forgetting her, if her company will have no record of her employment, if she'll fade like Mountain View Truck Plaza, becoming just a memory in a reality that's already moved on. Now she drives, and she remembers. And she writes it all down, creating a record of a world that refuses to stay consistent, hoping that someday, someone else will read her journals and know they're not alone in noticing the changes, the shifts, the places that appear and disappear when reality isn't looking. Story 8. The Sleepwalking Passenger. Thomas Bradley ran dedicated routes for a medical supply company, usually short regional hauls that had him home every other night. He'd been with the company for 4 years and appreciated the reasonable schedule and predictable routes. The work was steady but not exciting, which suited Thomas just fine at 47 years old with 2 teenagers and a mortgage. On a Thursday evening in August, Thomas was assigned an unusual run, a special delivery from Portland, Oregon to Boise, Idaho, leaving at 10 p.m. The cargo was standard medical supplies, but the job came with an unexpected requirement. He would have a passenger. Company policy doesn't allow passengers, Thomas told his dispatcher, Frank. Special circumstances, Frank explained. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, a sleep researcher. She's studying sleep patterns in professional drivers. Corporate approved it as part of a study. She'll just be monitoring, taking notes. You won't even know she's there. Thomas wasn't thrilled about the arrangement, but he'd learned not to argue with corporate initiatives. When he arrived at the loading facility, Dr. Chen was waiting, a woman in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back, wearing casual clothes and carrying a laptop bag and a small suitcase. "Mr. Bradley, thank you for accommodating me," she said, shaking his hand. "I'll be as unobtrusive as possible. I'm simply observing driver alertness and cognitive function during night drives. I may ask you occasional questions, but otherwise I'll just be taking notes." They loaded the cargo and departed Portland, heading east on Interstate 84. Dr. Chen settled into the passenger seat with her laptop, making occasional notes as Thomas drove. The first hour passed in relative silence, which Thomas appreciated. Around midnight, as they drove through the Columbia River Gorge, Dr. Chen closed her laptop. "Mr. Bradley, would you mind if I took a short nap? I've been up since 5 a.m. and I'm finding it difficult to concentrate on my notes." "No problem, doctor. I'll wake you if I need anything." Dr. Chen reclined the passenger seat slightly and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing became slow and regular. Thomas focused on the road, comfortable with the silence, watching the landscape pass by outside. About 30 minutes later, Thomas heard Dr. Chen speak. "Take the next exit," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. Thomas glanced over. Dr. Chen's eyes were closed, her body relaxed in sleep. "Dr. Chen," he said softly. "Take the next exit," she repeated, louder this time, but still with that strange flat affect. Her eyes remained closed. Thomas realized she was talking in her sleep. He'd heard of sleepwalking, but sleep-talking was new to him. He decided to ignore it and keep driving. "Take the next exit." Dr. Chen's voice rose to a shout, making Thomas jump. Her eyes were still closed, but her hands had gripped the armrests tightly. "Doctor, wake up," Thomas said, reaching over to gently shake her shoulder. "You're dreaming." Dr. Chen's eyes snapped open, but they were wrong, completely black, no whites visible, as if her pupils had expanded to consume her entire eyes. She turned her head toward Thomas with an unnaturally smooth motion. "Take the next exit," she said in a voice that didn't sound human anymore, a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep and hollow. Thomas jerked his hand back, his heart hammering. "What the hell?" Dr. Chen's arm shot out with impossible speed, grabbing the steering wheel and yanking it hard to the right. The truck swerved violently, and Thomas fought to regain control, pulling against her grip. For someone her size, she had horrifying strength. "Let go." Thomas shouted, finally managing to pull the wheel back. The truck straightened out, but Dr. Chen maintained her grip. "Exit," she insisted, pulling again. "Must exit, must stop, must deliver." Thomas slammed on the brakes, bringing the truck to a shuddering halt on the shoulder of the highway. He grabbed Dr. Chen's wrist and pulled her hand off the steering wheel. Her arm was rigid, the muscles locked, but he managed to remove her grip. The moment her hand left the wheel, Dr. Chen went limp, slumping back into the passenger seat. Her eyes rolled back to normal and she began to snore softly as if nothing had happened. Thomas sat breathing hard, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He pulled out his phone to call the police or his dispatcher or someone, but he had no cell signal in this stretch of the gorge. He looked at Dr. Chen, who appeared to be sleeping peacefully now. Had he imagined the black eyes, the inhuman voice, the impossible strength? It had happened so fast, and now she looked completely normal. Thomas decided to wake her properly this time. He shook her shoulder firmly. "Dr. Chen, wake up." She stirred, opened her eyes, normal brown eyes, and looked around groggily. "What? Where are we? Did I fall asleep?" "Yes, you fell asleep. And then you started talking. You grabbed the wheel and tried to force me to exit the highway." Dr. Chen looked genuinely confused. "I did what?" "Mr. Bradley, I'm sorry, I have no memory of that. I suffer from a sleep disorder, parasomnia. I sometimes act out my dreams. I should have warned you. I took medication before the trip, but it doesn't always work." "Your eyes turned black," Thomas said flatly, "and you spoke in a voice that wasn't human." Dr. Chen's expression became guarded. "Black eyes? Mr. Bradley, I think you might have been experiencing a microsleep episode yourself. Highway, the darkness, fatigue, it can play tricks on." "I know what I saw," Thomas interrupted. "I'm calling my dispatcher. You need to get out of my truck." "Please, Mr. Bradley, let me explain. The black eyes, that's a symptom of my condition. My pupils dilate extremely during sleep episodes. It's documented in my medical records. And the voice change is common in parasomnia patients. I know it's disturbing, but it's all neurological, nothing supernatural." Thomas wanted to believe her. The rational explanation was easier to accept than the alternative, but his instincts screamed that something was deeply wrong. "I'm going to finish this delivery," Thomas said slowly, "but you need to stay awake. No more sleeping. If you start showing any signs of another episode, I'm pulling over and you're getting out." "Understood," Dr. Chen nodded. "Absolutely. I'm truly sorry. Let me make some coffee from my thermos. I'll stay awake for the rest of the trip." They continued driving, Dr. Chen apparently alert now, sipping coffee and asking Thomas occasional questions about his route and schedule. For the next hour, everything seemed normal. Thomas began to relax, accepting that he'd overreacted to a medical condition he didn't understand. Then around 2 a.m., as they passed through a particularly isolated stretch of highway in eastern Oregon, every light in the truck went out. Headlights, dashboard lights, running lights, everything died simultaneously. Thomas found himself driving in complete darkness, only the faint starlight allowing him to barely perceive the road ahead. "What the?" Thomas pumped the brakes, trying to slow down safely without being able to see. The truck began to decelerate and Thomas fumbled for his hazard lights, but nothing worked. In the darkness, he heard Dr. Chen speak. "We're here." "What are you talking about? What's happening?" "We've arrived at the real destination. The place you were supposed to deliver the cargo." Thomas's eyes were adjusting to the darkness now, and he could see shapes forming on the road ahead. Figures. Dozens of figures standing in the middle of the highway waiting. "Dr. Chen, what the hell is going on?" "I'm not Dr. Chen," the woman in the passenger seat said calmly. "Dr. Chen was replaced 2 days ago. I'm using her body, her memories, her credentials. We needed someone the company would trust to get a driver to this location." Thomas's blood went cold. He maneuvered the truck around the figures, barely avoiding them, and pulled onto the shoulder, bringing the truck to a complete stop. He reached for the door handle, ready to run. The lights came back on all at once, flooding the cab with illumination. Thomas looked at his passenger. Dr. Chen, or whatever was wearing Dr. Chen's body, smiled at him with too many teeth, her mouth extending wider than should have been physically possible. "The cargo you're carrying isn't medical supplies, Mr. Bradley. Open the trailer. Look at what you've been transporting." "No," Thomas said firmly. "I'm getting out of this truck and I'm calling the police and—" "Look at the cargo," the thing insisted, its voice deepening, becoming multiple voices speaking in unison. "You need to see what your company does. What they've been using drivers like you to transport for years. Against his better judgment, against every survival instinct, Thomas found himself climbing out of the cab. The figures that had been standing on the highway were closer now, surrounding his truck, but they kept a distance of about 10 feet, forming a perimeter. Thomas walked to the back of his trailer, his hands shaking as he broke the seal and opened the rear doors. The interior was dark, but he could see shapes, containers, boxes, crates. He climbed up into the trailer and turned on his flashlight. The cargo was alive. The medical supply boxes each contained windows, and through those windows, Thomas could see people. Small people, children, dozens of them, all unconscious, all connected to tubes and monitors, all packed efficiently into containers designed to look like standard medical supply boxes. Thomas scrambled backward, falling out of the trailer, landing hard on the pavement. The figures, the ones surrounding his truck, moved closer. In the truck's running lights, he could see they were adults, men and women of various ages, all with the same empty expressions, all moving in unsettling synchronization. "You were cargo too," they said in unison, dozens of voices speaking the same words. "We were transported like you're transporting them, to facilities that don't exist for purposes we still don't understand. Some of us escaped, most didn't." The thing wearing Dr. Chen's body appeared beside Thomas, looking down at him. "Your company runs these routes once a month. Different drivers, different routes, but always the same cargo. Real medical supplies on the manifest. Human beings in the trailer. You were chosen because you follow rules, don't ask questions, complete every delivery on time." "I didn't know," Thomas whispered. "I swear I didn't know." "We believe you," the figure said, its too-wide smile finally returning to normal human dimensions. "That's why we stopped you, to show you, to give you a choice." "What choice?" "Help us free them and help us stop the next delivery. Or return to your truck, complete this run, collect your pay, and live with the knowledge of what you carried." Thomas looked at the trailer, at the small faces visible through the windows of those containers, at the synchronized figures surrounding him. This couldn't be real. This was impossible. But he was living it, experiencing it, and those children in the trailer were real regardless of how impossible the situation seemed. He made his decision. Thomas helped the figures unload every container from his trailer. They worked in eerie silence, moving with perfect coordination, carefully extracting each child and carrying them away into the darkness. He never learned where they took them, and he didn't ask. When the trailer was empty, the figures departed, vanishing into the night. The thing wearing Dr. Chen collapsed, becoming just Dr. Chen again, confused and disoriented, with no memory of the past 4 hours. Thomas called the police, reported the truck stolen, claimed he'd been attacked and knocked unconscious. The investigation found an empty trailer, no evidence of cargo, and no signs of anything unusual. Dr. Chen confirmed she'd fallen asleep and remembered nothing after that. The medical supply company was investigated based on Thomas's claims but found to be completely legitimate. No evidence of human trafficking, no suspicious activity, no irregularities in their records. Thomas was offered counseling for trauma and urged to take time off. He quit the next day. But sometimes, late at night, Thomas receives calls from blocked numbers. When he answers, he hears children's voices saying "thank you," and then the line goes dead. He never returned to trucking, and he never stopped wondering how many other drivers were unknowingly transporting cargo they'd never want to deliver, driving routes they'd never want to complete, working for companies whose true business existed somewhere in the darkness between legitimate operations and impossible nightmares. Story 9. The Radio Transmission. Victor Santos had been a long-haul driver for 22 years, one of the old-timers who'd started before GPS, before smartphones, when CB radio was the only real connection to other road. He still used his CB religiously, preferring the community and camaraderie of trucker chatter to the isolation of driving in silence. Victor's CB handle was Desert Fox, earned during his years running routes through the Southwest. He was known among other regular drivers for his stories, his willingness to help stranded motorists, and his distinctive voice, a deep baritone that carried clearly even through static. In mid-November, Victor was running a load from Omaha to Denver, traveling westbound on Interstate 80 through Nebraska. It was a clear night, cold but dry, with light traffic. Victor had his CB tuned to channel 19, listening to the usual chatter, drivers reporting road conditions, sharing coffee recommendations, complaining about the usual delays and frustrations of the job. Around midnight, the CB went silent. Not gradual, not fading, just instantly silent as if someone had flipped a switch. Victor checked his radio, adjusted the squelch, changed channels. Nothing. No voices, no static, just dead silence. He was troubleshooting the connections when a voice came through, strong and clear. "Desert Fox, this is Phantom 6. Do you copy?" Victor didn't recognize the handle. "This is Desert Fox. I copy, Phantom 6. Thought my radio was dead there for a minute. What's your 20? I'm right behind you, Desert Fox. Look in your mirror." Victor checked his mirrors. The highway behind him was empty, no headlights visible for miles. "I don't see anyone back there, Phantom 6. You sure you got the right driver?" "I'm certain. Check your driver's side mirror, you'll see me." Victor looked again at the driver's side mirror, still nothing. But as he watched, a pair of headlights gradually materialized as if they'd been there all along and he'd simply failed to notice. A semi-truck too far back to identify clearly, maintaining a steady distance. "All right, I see you now," Victor said. "Where you heading?" "Same place you are," the voice replied. "Same place we're all heading eventually." Something about the phrasing made Victor uncomfortable. "You running to Denver?" In a manner of speaking. "Tell me, Desert Fox, do you remember the accident?" Victor's hand tightened on the CB microphone. "What accident? Who is this?" "The accident that happened 6 months ago. Interstate 80, mile marker 315. A truck crossed the median. Your truck, Desert Fox. Do you remember?" Victor's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't had any accidents." "Are you sure? Think carefully. Think about the last thing you remember before this trip started." Victor tried to remember. He'd loaded the trailer in Omaha, filled out, started driving west on I-80. That was clear. But what had happened before that? Where had he driven from before reaching Omaha? He couldn't remember. The memory was fuzzy, indistinct. I came from Des Moines," Victor said, but even as he spoke, he wasn't sure if that was true. "You didn't come from anywhere, Desert Fox. You've been driving this same stretch of highway for 6 months. Omaha to Denver, the same route, over and over. You die in an accident at mile marker 315, and then you start over at Omaha and drive it again. That's insane. I'm talking to my dispatcher regularly. I'm making deliveries. This isn't a loop. Is it? When was the last time you spoke to someone who wasn't on CB radio? When did you last stop at a truck stop and interact with real people?" Victor opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. When had he last stopped? He had vague memories of truck stops, of fueling up, of buying coffee. But now that Phantom 6 was making him think about it, those memories were indistinct, generic, like stock footage rather than specific experiences. "Check your logbook," Phantom 6 suggested. Victor reached for his logbook, flipping it open to the current date. The entries were their dates, times, locations, fuel stops. But as Victor looked at them, the entries began to blur, the ink running, becoming illegible. Within seconds, the pages were blank except for one repeated entry over and over. "Departed Omaha. Destination Denver. Never arrived." "What the hell is this?" Victor whispered. "You're a ghost, Desert Fox. We all are. Everyone broadcasting on this channel right now. We're all drivers who died on our routes, stuck in loops, repeating our final runs forever. Some of us have been doing this for decades. We keep each other company. We pretend it's normal." Victor switched CB channels frantically, trying to find normal chatter, anything to prove Phantom 6 was lying. But every channel was silent except for one voice, Phantom 6, following him in every frequency. You can accept it or you can keep denying it, Phantom 6 continued. But either way, in about 43 miles, you'll reach mile marker 315, and the other truck will come across the median, and you'll try to avoid it just like you do every time, and you'll fail just like you do every time, and then you'll wake up in Omaha and start the drive again. No, Victor said firmly. I'm not dead. I'm not a ghost. This is some kind of trick. Look at your hands, Desert Fox. Victor looked down at his hands on the steering wheel. They were translucent, fading in and out like a weak radio signal. He could see the steering wheel through them, could see the dashboard through flesh. He slammed his foot on the brake, bringing the truck to a shuddering stop in the right lane. He held his hands up in front of his face. They were solid again, completely opaque, normal in every way. It comes and goes, Phantom 6 said through the CB. The solidity. Sometimes we feel real. Sometimes we see the truth. Victor grabbed his cell phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. The phone showed no signal. He tried anyway, dialing his dispatcher's number, his wife's number, 911. The calls wouldn't connect. He climbed out of the cab, standing on the shoulder of Interstate 80 in the middle of Nebraska. The night was silent except for the wind. No traffic passed. No cars, no trucks, nothing. He was alone on an empty highway that stretched infinitely in both directions. You can walk if you want, Phantom 6's voice said, now coming from inside Victor's truck. Some drivers do that. They abandon their trucks and walk, but you'll just end up back in Omaha starting the drive again. There's no escape, Desert Fox, only acceptance. Victor climbed back into his truck, his mind reeling. He tried to remember his life before trucking. His wife, what was her name? His kids, how many did he have? His house, what did it look like? The memories were there, but they were generic, like placeholder images rather than real recollections. How do I stop the loop? Victor asked quietly. You don't, Phantom 6 replied. None of us do. We drive, we repeat. We keep each other company on the radio. It's not so bad once you accept it. You'll meet other drivers, other ghosts. We're a community, Desert Fox, a family of the forever departed. Victor put his truck in gear and started driving again. Mile markers passed. 280, 290, 300. He watched the numbers climb, knowing what was coming at 315. He tried to prepare himself. He'd take the exit before 315. He'd pull over and stop. He'd change lanes. He'd do something different, break the pattern. But when mile marker 310 appeared, Victor found his hands wouldn't respond. They gripped the steering wheel, keeping him in the right lane, maintaining steady speed. He tried to lift his foot from the accelerator. It wouldn't move. You can't change it, Phantom 6 said gently. We've all tried. The loop is fixed. We can only observe, never alter. Mile marker 315 appeared ahead. Victor saw the other truck, a westbound semi in the eastbound lanes, crossing the median, coming directly at him. He screamed, pulling the wheel hard, but his hands moved through the steering wheel as if it wasn't there. He was insubstantial again, ghost-like, unable to affect the physical world. The trucks collided head-on. Victor felt the pain, felt himself dying. And then he was in Omaha, parked at a loading dock, filling out paperwork for a delivery to Denver. The familiar process, the familiar route. Victor looked at his hands, solid, real. He picked up his CB microphone. Desert Fox checking in, heading west on 80. Anyone out there want to keep me company? A chorus of voices responded, dozens of drivers with their handles and greetings. And among them, he heard Phantom 6. Welcome back, Desert Fox. Good to hear your voice again. Victor drove westbound, knowing where it would end, knowing he'd do it again and again and again. But Phantom 6 was right about one thing. At least he wasn't alone. The CB radio chatter continued, drivers sharing stories and jokes, warning each other about speed traps that no longer existed, recommending truck stops they'd never actually visit. And Victor joined in, becoming part of the community of forever drivers, the ghosts of Interstate 80, all heading to destinations they'd never reach, dying in accidents they couldn't prevent, and starting over in an endless loop of highway and darkness, and the lonely companionship of others trapped in the same eternal drive. Sometimes, living drivers pick up fragments of their transmissions, strange CB chatter that doesn't quite make sense, warnings about hazards that aren't there, voices that sound distant and hollow. Most drivers dismiss it as interference, atmospheric conditions, or pranks. But somewhere on Interstate 80 in Nebraska, Victor Santos drives westbound every night, his CB radio connecting him to dozens of other drivers who can never stop, never rest, never arrive. They share their stories, their jokes, their warnings, and they wait for the next driver to join their ranks, the next fatal accident, the next ghost who will wake up confused and disoriented, starting a delivery they've completed 1,000 times before. Mile marker 315 is coming. It's always coming. And the CB chatter continues, voices in the darkness, keeping each other company on a highway that has no end and no beginning, only the eternal present of that final, fatal run. Story 10. The Weightless Cargo. Angela Martinez prided herself on her technical knowledge. In her 11 years of commercial driving, she'd learned not just how to operate a semi-truck, but how to maintain it, diagnose problems, optimize fuel efficiency, and handle every mechanical challenge the road could present. She was the driver other drivers called when they had questions. In late January, Angela accepted a high-paying load from a chemical company, industrial solvents being transported from Houston to St. Louis. The pay was excellent, triple the usual rate for the distance, and the cargo was properly permitted and documented. The only unusual requirement was that she had to maintain specific speeds on different segments of the route, no faster and no slower than the posted requirements on her shipping instructions. Angela loaded the trailer at a chemical facility outside Houston, watching as workers in hazmat suits secured the containers. Each drum was carefully strapped down, and the workers checked and double-checked the tie-downs with unusual meticulousness. The trailer was sealed with a special lock, and Angela was given explicit instructions not to open it under any circumstances. She departed Houston in the early evening, planning to drive through the night. The first segment required her to maintain exactly 65 miles per hour on Interstate 45 northbound. Angela engaged her cruise control and settled in. For the first hour, everything was normal. The truck handled well, the load felt properly balanced, and traffic was light. But around 9 p.m., Angela began to notice something strange. The truck felt lighter. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible, just a slight difference in how the truck responded to acceleration and braking. Angela had driven loaded trucks for so long that she developed an instinctual feel for weight distribution. Something was wrong. She checked her mirrors, making sure the trailer was still attached. It was. She checked the tire pressure monitors, all normal. But the sensation of lightness continued to increase. It felt like the trailer was gradually becoming empty, as if the cargo was somehow disappearing. Angela consulted her instructions. The next segment would require a speed of exactly 58 miles per hour starting at mile marker 220. She was currently approaching 215. She slowed down, adjusting her cruise control to exactly 58 as specified. The moment her speed dropped to 58, the truck lurched forward as if someone had suddenly removed half the trailer's weight. Angela gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting to maintain control. The trailer began to sway, moving with much more freedom than it should have been able to with 40,000 pounds of chemicals on board. "What the hell?" Angela muttered, checking her mirrors again. The trailer looked normal, tracking properly behind the cab despite the unsettling lack of weight. She picked up her phone to call the chemical company. Before she could dial, the phone rang. An unknown number. Angela answered. "Hello. Ms. Martinez, this is Dr. Philip Crane from Nexus Chemical. I'm monitoring your load. Everything is proceeding normally. Do not deviate from the specified speeds under any circumstances." "Dr. Crane, something's wrong with the cargo. The trailer feels like it's losing weight. That is expected and normal. The chemical compound you're transporting has unusual properties. As long as you maintain the specified speeds, the load will remain stable. What kind of chemical loses weight while sitting in sealed containers? The details are proprietary, Ms. Martinez. Simply follow the instructions. Your next speed adjustment will be at mile marker 245, reduced to exactly 45 miles per hour. Doctor, I don't feel safe continuing this. Ms. Martinez, you signed a contract. There are substantial penalties for failing to complete delivery. The cargo is perfectly safe as long as you maintain the correct speeds. Trust the process. The line went dead. Angela considered pulling over and refusing to continue, but she thought about the penalty clauses in her contract, thought about her business loans and equipment payments. She decided to continue but remain vigilant for any signs of actual danger. At mile marker 245, she reduced her speed to exactly 45 miles per hour as instructed. The trailer became even lighter. It now felt like she was pulling an empty trailer, despite knowing that thousands of gallons of industrial chemicals were supposedly on board. And then the trailer began to rise. Angela watched in her mirrors as the trailer lifted off the ground, the wheels no longer touching the pavement. The trailer was floating, still connected to her cab by the kingpin coupling, but hovering approximately 2 feet above the road. She screamed and slammed on the brakes, but her instructions sheet, which was magnetically attached to her dashboard, suddenly displayed a new message in glowing red letters. Do not stop. Maintain speed. Critical. Angela's foot moved back to the accelerator against her will, as if something else was controlling her body. Her speed returned to exactly 45 miles per hour, and the trailer continued floating behind her, now rising to 3 feet off the ground. Her CB radio crackled to life. Dr. Crane's voice came through. Ms. Martinez, you must remain calm. The cargo is undergoing a temporary phase transition. It will return to normal density once you reach the next speed adjustment point at mile marker 30. Until then, do not stop. Do not deviate from 45 miles per hour. My trailer is flying. This isn't possible. It's very possible, Ms. Martinez. The compound you're transporting exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Your speed, combined with the Earth's rotation and specific gravitational conditions along this route, keeps it anchored to our dimension. If you stop or change speed outside the specified parameters, the cargo will fully transition to its primary dimension, taking your trailer with it. Angela wanted to scream, wanted to cry, wanted to wake up from this impossible nightmare. But she kept her foot on the accelerator, maintaining exactly 45 miles per hour, watching in her mirrors as her trailer floated higher, now a good 5 feet off the ground, connected to her cab by only the kingpin and the electrical connections. Other drivers began to notice. Several cars passed her, their occupants staring in disbelief at the floating trailer. A state patrol car pulled up alongside her, the officer's face a mask of confusion. He activated his lights and sirens, gesturing for Angela to pull over. Do not stop, Dr. Crane's voice insisted through the CB. The officer cannot pursue. His vehicle will fail if he follows you further. The patrol car attempted to stay alongside Angela, but after about 30 seconds, all its lights died. The car began to slow, losing power, drifting to the shoulder as if its engine had completely failed. Angela drove on, alone on the highway now, other traffic apparently avoiding her. The trailer continued to rise, now 10 feet off the ground, the electrical connection straining, about to break. Speed adjustment point approaching, Dr. Crane announced. At mile marker 330, increased to exactly 72 miles per hour. The cargo will weigh anchor. Mile marker 330 appeared ahead. Angela pressed the accelerator, watching her speedometer climb. 60 miles per hour. 65, 70, 72. The trailer slammed back down onto the road with a tremendous crash, the suspension absorbing the impact. The load suddenly had weight again, enormous weight, more than it had before. Angela's truck groaned under the strain, the engine laboring to maintain 72 miles per hour with what now felt like 60,000 pounds of cargo instead of 40,000. Phase transition complete, Dr. Crane said calmly. Maintain 72 miles per hour for the next 80 miles. The cargo has absorbed additional mass from its prime position. This is normal and expected. Nothing about this is normal, Angela shouted at the CB. By human standards, no. But physics operates differently across dimensional boundaries. You're performing a very important task, Ms. Martinez. This compound will be used to anchor a facility that exists partially outside normal spacetime. Your successful delivery will contribute to groundbreaking research. I didn't sign up to transport interdimensional cargo. Actually, you did. The contract you signed included a clause about materials with non-standard physical properties. Most drivers don't read the fine print, but you're performing excellently. Only 2 more speed adjustments and you'll reach St. Louis. The next 6 hours were the most surreal of Angela's life. At each speed adjustment point, the cargo shifted properties, sometimes becoming lighter, sometimes heavier, sometimes vibrating with a low-frequency hum that made Angela's teeth ache, sometimes glowing faintly through the seams of the trailer. At one point, while maintaining exactly 38 miles per hour through a construction zone, Angela's mirrors showed that the trailer was moving backward even though the truck was moving forward. The trailer was somehow reversing through time while being pulled forward through space. Another speed adjustment caused the trailer to flicker in and out of visibility, existing and not existing in rapid alternation like a strobe light. Through it all, Dr. Crane provided instructions over the CB, his voice calm and clinical, as if these reality-defying phenomena were routine laboratory observations. Finally, as dawn broke, Angela approached St. Louis. Her instructions indicated the final speed, exactly 55 miles per hour for the last 10 miles. She adjusted her cruise control, and the trailer settled into normal behavior, solid, visible, weighing what it should weigh, obeying the usual laws of physics. The delivery location was a nondescript warehouse in an industrial area. Workers in hazmat suits were waiting, along with Dr. Crane himself, a thin man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen things beyond normal human experience. "Excellent work, Ms. Martinez," he said as the workers began unloading. "Flawless execution." "What the hell did I just transport?" Angela demanded. "A compound we call dimensional anchor fluid. It exists across multiple realities simultaneously. Transporting it requires specific conditions, speed, trajectory, and quantum resonance to keep it stable in our dimension. You maintain those conditions perfectly. And if I hadn't," Dr. Crane smiled grimly, "the cargo would have fully transitioned to its primary dimension. Your trailer would have gone with it. You would have been left with a cab suddenly unburdened, probably would have lost control. The trailer would have ended up somewhere else or someone else. We've lost 3 shipments that way. The drivers survived, but we never recovered the trailers or cargo." Angela was paid 3 times what she'd been promised. Dr. Crane called it a hazard bonus and made her sign additional non-disclosure agreements. She deposited the money, paid off her equipment loans, and immediately posted her truck for sale. She never drove commercially again. But sometimes, late at night, Angela sees trucks on the highway that don't obey normal physics. A trailer that floats slightly above its wheels. A rig that flickers in and out of visibility. A truck that seems to be moving in multiple directions simultaneously. And she knows those drivers are transporting cargo like hers, carrying materials that exist between dimensions, maintaining precisely calculated speeds to keep reality from tearing apart. She wonders how many drivers are doing this unknowingly, how many loads are more than they appear, how many ordinary deliveries are actually crucial operations to maintain the integrity of spacetime itself. The roads are full of trucks carrying normal cargo, furniture, food, electronics. But mixed among them are others, driven by people like Angela who read the fine print too late, who signed contracts they didn't fully understand, who found themselves transporting the impossible along highways that cut through more than just geography. Angela never tells anyone about her last delivery. Who would believe her? But she keeps the photos she took with her phone, images of her trailer floating 10 feet off the ground, existing and not existing, moving backward through time. And sometimes, on clear nights when the stars align in certain patterns, she receives calls from unknown numbers. Dr. Crane's voice, offering her another job, another delivery, another chance to transport the impossible across the dimensional boundaries that most people never know exist. Angela always declines, but she knows other drivers are accepting those offers, signing those contracts, loading those trailers with cargo that defies the laws of physics. And she wonders, every time she sees a semi-truck on the highway, if that driver knows what they're really carrying, or if they're about to discover, as Angela did, that reality is stranger than anyone wants to believe, and that the roads we travel connect more than just cities, but dimensions, realities, and possibilities that exist just beyond the edge of normal human perception.